So, you want to move to Portugal, sit on the beach, working from anywhere in the country, living life up, drinking green wine day and night while you are sitting in front of your computer, just letting the cash roll in. I'll say that there's maybe a little bit more to running your business than meets the eye when it comes to living in Portugal. I'm Rafael de Furia, here for another episode of Not Your Average Globetrotter. Roll that intro. So I think really when it comes down to it, that you have to think about all of the possibilities, all the positives and negatives. And a couple of years ago, after moving to Portugal, I uploaded an episode talking about why I chose to run a company rather than have the NHR. And in my situation, I didn't understand then that I could have also taken advantage of the NHR, but it would have actually put me into a worse tax category even than what I could get as just an employee of this company. Owning a commercial entity in Portugal, I would say, doesn't have many downsides, but there are going to be situations where it's going to make more sense and where it's not going to make more sense. Maybe having a business as a freelancer with just green receipts, the recibo verde system in Portugal, might make more sense if you are someone that doesn't have a lot of overhead with your business, that you don't have expenses, that you don't have to buy equipment, computers, or a phone, or pay for your internet service, all of these different things. When you start having more of those expenditures, then that's when I would say it becomes a little bit more interesting to start looking at it. Of course, keep in mind with this video, none of this is tax advice. I'm just a guy with a commercial entity that is based in Portugal, and these are some of my opinions based on my experience and what I've gone through working and living here in Portugal, having this commercial entity here. For my business, there ends up being a lot of work that can be done in person, sometimes has to be done in person, but a lot of it can be done remotely. Sometimes it's consulting, sometimes it's editing, sometimes it's coming up with ideas. So some of the things that are a little bit more on the kind of creative in front of this computer sort of work, that's very easy to do from really anywhere. So I don't have to worry about some of those particular details. If I had to start thinking about doing a lot more in-person work, then it might become a question whether it would really be worthwhile or not. Then it becomes a question of where are your customers based? Where are the people that you are working with based? Are you opening up a business to bill your client in America or in Europe or in Portugal or this or that? If you're working with Portuguese clients, I would say actually the way that the system seems to be set up almost would kind of make it a little bit more annoying. Most of my clients are based outside of Portugal, so there are certain things that come into play that make it a little bit easier to work with. From what was explained to me, that if you are working with clients domestically, then you will have to charge VAT, value added tax, on top, or in Portuguese, IVA. But again, I don't handle the invoices for my business, so that's something that my accountant does. And again, also, as I mentioned a couple years ago, having an accountant, if you are running a business, a company here, is required. If you're just doing the green receipts, as far as I'm aware, it may actually not be the case. But in my experience, to stay like on top of everything, you actually do have to have an accountant with you. And so in my case, my accountant handles all the invoicing. I tell them how much to charge, and then they do all the calculations and everything based on what needs to be done legally. But from what I understand is that you end up working with clients within the European Union, then the tax for another company becomes a non-issue. If it's for an individual, then it's a different story. If you're working with another legal entity, another like company, then there are different sorts of things. If you have to collect the tax, if you don't have to collect the tax, there are all of those little details, not little details, big details at the end of the day. And so these are things that you kind of have to keep a little bit of an eye on, that you have to keep some track of, because if you're maybe working with certain people from certain places and you start quoting at prices, and then you have to worry about sales tax on top, or actually the way it really goes here is sales tax included in the overall price, then that can start eating into your profits. And then also you have to consider a salary for yourself. And then also you have to consider the corporate tax or personal tax, all those various factors. Of course, like everywhere, you have to work within the system to see how you can minimize some of the impact those things will have at the end of the year for yourself, and how to work through it all. Of course, that's why even regardless of whether you could do it for yourself or not, having someone there on your side really does make a difference. The one thing that I said in my last video when I talked about doing this and having to have an accountant, that I wouldn't make any recommendations for an accountant, even for the person that I was using at the time, because I am the type of person that if I make a recommendation for anybody, I have to be extremely, extremely ready to be able to stand behind what that person is doing. And unfortunately, I had the experience with the accountant that there were a lot of things that I was not happy about working with this company that I had hired out for this particular service. There was reliability issues, communication issues, and so that's something that I've been working on switching over to someone else, to another accounting firm. The problem is that during this time, with the cost of everything going up, so have the cost of accountants. I've seen prices from anywhere from $500 a month to like say $150. These days per month, $150 a month is something that I would say I haven't really seen anything really less than that. With my old accountant, I was paying significantly less than that. Actually, when we started, I was paying less than 100, and then it went up to 104. It was supposed to go up to 120. But anyway, at this moment in time, I can say that you do see a difference in the types of services. I would generally recommend straying away from firms that cater specifically to an expat audience and that they're charging you because they are doing their services in English, because you're from another country and need someone to help you in this new place. I think it's always better to go with a local who can help you in your language, or if you speak the local language well enough, to be able to go with them. So that's something that with my first accountant that I was able to get into someone's firm that did have just a local presence, really going for locals. But unfortunately, like I said, there were issues with trying to work with this individual. So now starting to try to work with another firm. Let's see how that goes. There, of course, are some little things along the way that you have to switch over, and then even switching from one accountant to another. There can be some annoying little details between, but it's really not that big of a deal at the end of the day. You just have to get your current accountant or your old accountant to say that they have no reason that you don't owe them money, or to whatever, to say that they're happy to clear your business out from their service to be able to hand it over to another accountant. At least this was what was explained to me. Again, some of the finer details aren't some of the things that I'm going to be going over in this episode. As many of these episodes, this is just kind of an overview of what my experience has been like so far. And like I was talking about before, I won't make a recommendation unless I feel very confident in the specific service that I would be able to recommend somebody for. And it just so happened there was actually a couple of individuals who contacted me over the past couple of years who saw that video and were like, hey, well, no, I totally get that you don't want to make the recommendation, but like, hey, could you just give me their information anyways? Like, no. Like, really, I'm not going to give it. But the reality of it is because I have had such a negative experience myself. So you really do have to be careful. And I would say maybe one major thing that I would take into consideration is, again, talk to different accountants, see who potentially you can communicate best with at the beginning. Of course, this goes anywhere. This is nothing unique to Portugal, but I might start looking at firms that have more than just a couple of people working there. For example, if your accountant specifically is unavailable one afternoon, but you need to get an invoice out quickly, do they have assistants who would be able to issue that invoice for you on your behalf? So this actually, even in my situation, was an issue that came up multiple times with the previous individual who I'd worked with, that they would say, oh yes, I'll get that done today. 2 weeks later, still no invoice issued. And I would say overall, it's actually quite simple to just kind of go through the day-to-days. You want to understand the guidelines and what you're allowed to do, what you're not allowed to do, that maybe you're restricted to certain things or you're not restricted to certain things, and where you can kind of go around. And also, even then, having that accountant with you who is able to be communicative and able to help you along the way is going to be really great, so that you can ask them, hey, am I doing this right? Am I doing this wrong? Should I be doing this? Should I be doing that? Or what am I allowed to do in this instance? Or do I have to do a certain thing? Or do I have to include this? Or do I have to take that out? Like, for example, if you're issuing a quote, do you have to make sure that this individual that you're quoting has to have the tax on top? Or do they have to have the tax removed? Or do they have to think about tax? There are all these different factors that kind of come into play. And then also even understanding what are your requirements, what are your obligations as a business owner and as somebody who might be earning dividends or a salary through your business. What are the taxes that are going to come into play? What are the things that you're going to have to start worrying about? And even Social Security. That's the one thing that I would say can get a little bit annoying. It's not low. I'm not going to go into specific numbers or how much or this or that, but even when you're paying the minimum amount per month, it does definitely eat into your profits, and it is not insignificant. And it seems as though from what I've been told that it is an expense that you don't get taxed on because you're only taxed on your profits at the end of the year to begin with anyway. Again, not legal advice, not tax advice, but this is just what my understanding is based on what's been explained to me. But even then, I would say even having to pay the taxes themselves and getting all of that done is all very straightforward, because your accountant at the end of the year, or in the middle of the next year rather, will give you how much you earned and what was your profit of the previous year and how much you actually owe to the government in Portugal. And so then once you have that number, you just go and you can go into various different locations in person, or you can pay directly from your bank account. And that's also a very straightforward process. You're given like a couple of codes plus the amount that you actually owe, and then it's done. Like, it's quick and simple. And I did briefly mention that you would have to have a bank account here. And that is actually one thing that I would say can be a little bit annoying to deal with. Banking in Portugal is not necessarily my favorite country to deal with banking and making payments and receiving payments. There's some extra complication that I would say is maybe unnecessary to an extent. You have the regular European interbanking system, as well as the Portuguese MBWay system, the multibanco system. So there's a couple of ways that you could transfer money around or receive money from around the country or even from around Europe. Although the multibanco system, as far as I understand, is really just here in Portugal. So it's like the international bank account number, that IBAN, that whole SEPA transfer zone thing is really the more what you would use on a regular basis if you're dealing with other countries. But if you are dealing with other countries and you have to make a payment, say through an online website, yeah, of course you can do that normally through like a debit card, through a corporate debit card or credit card. Or if you need to make a transfer through a bank account, through a wire transfer, then you maybe, depending on the type of bank account you have, maybe you can have X amount of instant transfers and it'll be able to go within the SEPA European zone, maybe within a few moments. Or if you don't pay the fee at all, then you might have a free transfer, but it'll arrive in like 1 to 2 business days. I would say that's actually really not so bad to begin with. But for those times where you do need those transfers to be much faster, then that's another thing. But also, when you are running a business in Portugal, you'll have the business account, and then if you are banking in Portugal, then you also have your personal account. From what it seems as though that if you are working within Portugal, that some of those transfers, if you're going from your like paying your salary or for dividends or whatever it may be, I'm not getting into my personal situation, but from what I've seen and from what I've heard from others, that just about all the time when the transfer is made, as soon as it's made, the money is already in the other account. It's not always going to be that way, but within a lot of banks here in Portugal, some of these, without even having to send an instant transfer, will still be nearly instantaneously. And then even, for example, if you are banking with the same company that your personal account is the same as where your corporate account is, then that can also be done. The funds can be received very fast within seconds. So even knowing just that detail of how you're getting your money, I would say, is a very big detail and something that I was really wondering about when I first got started up. Because, well, if I need to pay my rent on a certain date, then I only get the pay slip, or I only get this, or I only get that. How long is it going to be before I can actually make sure that my landlord is getting the money that they're supposed to be receiving at the beginning of the month? What does that all look like? And knowing how your money comes in and how it goes out and how it all moves, I would say, to me personally, can be a bit of a relief to be able to plan around. But then there's also operation costs and thinking about those sorts of things. Okay, do you need an internet connection? Do you need phone? Do you need this? Do you need that? Then there's also the factor of, do you need to hire people, or how do you hire people, or how do you work with other businesses? From the way that things look, the way that the system is put in place here, to me, as a small business owner, it's very difficult from a financial standpoint to start thinking about how it might be possible to bring an employee into the picture with all of the various financial concerns and legal concerns. For example, from what I understand, again, this is not tax advice, financial or legal advice, but from what I've been told, that if you are having to pay for a full-time employee in Portugal, that you will pay them 14 months total for every 12 calendar months. It will come down to certain bonuses, like for a holiday bonus, and then even a food daily allowance. The food daily allowance, I think, is a minimum of like €5 or €6, something like this. But this all can get calculated into the individual's salary and kind of spread out over the whole year. And then also another factor to consider is the base minimum wage in Portugal and how realistic or not realistic it is to live on that. And it's a number that is supposed to be going up year by year over the next however many years. Last year it was, I think, 700 and something. This year it's like €805. So is your business earning enough income to be able to pay for that? And then is that realistic enough to be able to hire someone for the job that you need them to do? But also having to think about their social security and how much those contributions are on top of that, and having to think about making sure that everything is done in a legal way presents a challenge to a small business, and the costs involved are tricky. I mean, I would say in some ways it almost feels as though that it would be easier to work with another commercial entity based outside of the country, but within the European Union, and to work with another business that's based within the European Union. And because even if you're hiring someone like a freelancer in Portugal, I've heard stories about how if that individual, the freelancer, is doing X percentage of work or X amount of work for you or X hours of work for you over Y period of time, then that person could take the company or the business to court and say, hey, they're trying to skirt around the law and they're trying to this and they're trying to that, and start being able to make demands that an employee would have rights to. So that's something that I would say, for me, as somebody who would like to be able to hire others, creates a challenge that I have to be able to build the business to a point far beyond what I might have to comfortably do in other places, at least from the places that I've worked in and from different countries. I'm not saying it would be necessarily different in the European Union, but I've been to other places and lived in other places in the world where that wouldn't necessarily have the same level of concern as a small business owner. Of course, you want to be able to provide a fair wage and something fair to what the person is actually doing for you, but also as a small business owner, you do still have to make a profit, because it's not just simply the employee at the end of the day, it's the whole ecosystem together. Because yes, the employee is one part of that, but then the business also has to function and be able to be profitable within itself. So being able to grow your business, and also with taxes and social contributions and some of these things, there are, in my opinion, certain fiscal challenges that are in front of you that you really do have to be able to work past. And maybe as an individual, to work past those levels could be quite challenging, and to do more than what you might have the capability for without being able to bring someone else in on your team. This is why I'm saying having another commercial entity to maybe even subcontract to for certain things. Of course, this depends on what you're doing. So if you just have a digital product and there are copies upon copies upon copies of that just being produced automatically online, then okay, some of these details you're not going to have to think about, but you'll still have to think about the ability to scale your business to a point to that it can be sustainable for the business itself and for an employee to become a part of that, or multiple employees to become a part of that. So I'm not saying at the end of the day that it's not worth it, but there are a lot of challenges and there are a lot of factors that you really need to think about if they're right for you. And this is why, of course, that I'm not giving advice in this episode, that I am just talking about some of the things that I've been noticing and why I think it's really so important to just be able to speak to an accountant first before opening up a company or deciding to go as a freelancer with green receipts, because there are going to be some major differences between them. And like maybe with the green receipts, if you don't have a lot of cost of operation, then that could be worthwhile for you. But if you do have quite a few costs of operation, then maybe you need to start thinking about that. But what's the best, how it's going to work, and then also it's going to depend on what country you're from and how the tax system works from that country and this and that and the other, all of those other things. Because when you're dealing with just the Portuguese system, you're dealing with one thing. But if you have anything to do with your country of birth, your country of nationality, your citizenship country, as some individuals do, I'm not going to go into details about what country that is, but I'm sure for those of you who are from there that it is not going to be difficult to guess what country I'm talking about. But you do have to take those also into consideration as well. And to be able to speak to somebody from that country who's also an accountant who might be a little bit familiar with how that all works. And then, is it worthwhile? Is it not worthwhile? Are you opening up a business in the mainland of Portugal, or are you opening it up in the islands? Because if you're opening it up in the islands, then you'll have certain potential benefits and tax schemes that could become available to you that would make it really, really interesting to be there. But if you're in the mainland of Portugal, then maybe you might not have some of those available to you, but you'll have maybe some more comforts of kind of day-to-day life and more ease of being able to move around the European Union. So what's actually the best, how it works, I don't have the answer for you, and you might have to just try it out for yourself. But thank you all for joining me for another episode of Not Your Average Globetrotter. Of course, a huge thank you to those of you who helped to make these episodes possible through patreon.com/Rafael de Furia on a monthly basis, or rafaeldefuria.com/support, or the thanks button here on YouTube for that one-time support. Of course, as always, I'm Rafael de Furia. Stay safe and healthy out there, and I'll see you all next time for another episode of Not Your Average Globetrotter. Later.